we did was outstandingly wonderful. It was good, but was it great? And I was thinking, was it really great? And I said, if we're going to do a record, it has to be great.
For decades, Mick Jagger watched other bands rise to fame while quietly judging everything they did wrong. And at 73, he decided the world deserved to know the truth. 7 massively successful bands earned his secret hatred, each one representing something he believed was destroying real rock music. Some copied his style shamelessly, others made rock too soft and safe, while a few traded authenticity for corporate success or relied on manufactured controversy instead of genuine rebellion. Did these bands deserve his harsh criticism, or was Jagger just protecting his legacy? What does his honesty reveal about the battle between success and authenticity? Join us as we uncover the feuds and frustrations that defined his view of rock history. Number 3 is a real shocker. Number 7. Aerosmith. Mick Jagger never tried to hide how he felt about Aerosmith, believing they copied the Rolling Stones way too much. Steven Tyler sang like him, the band moved like them on stage, and their whole attitude felt borrowed. For Jagger, it was not a compliment, but theft. Aerosmith started in the early 70s when the Stones were already huge, and rock fans noticed the similarities right away. Tyler had the same skinny frame and wild energy as Jagger, moving his hips the same way and singing with that raspy voice that sounded almost identical. The band even dressed in similar clothes, wearing scarves, tight pants, and loose shirts that all looked familiar. Jagger saw all of this, and he was not happy, believing rock and roll should be original. You could be influenced by other bands, sure, because everyone was influenced by someone, but you had to bring something new and add your own voice. Aerosmith felt like they just took what the Stones had already done and repeated it, never evolving it or pushing it forward, just imitating it. The comparisons annoyed him the most, with music writers constantly saying Steven Tyler was like the American Mick Jagger, and fans calling Aerosmith the American Rolling Stones. Every time someone said it, Jagger felt insulted because he had spent years building his image and his sound, working hard to create something unique. Now, another band was getting credit for doing the same thing without doing the work or earning it. Jagger also felt like imitation hurt rock music overall, arguing that if every new band just copied the successful ones, then nothing would ever change and rock would become boring and lose its edge. The whole point of rock was to rebel and break rules, but you could not rebel by doing exactly what someone else already did, because that was not rebellion. That was just following. Some people defended Aerosmith, saying every artist borrows from their heroes, and pointing out that the Stones had borrowed from blues musicians, taking inspiration from Chuck Berry and Muddy Waters. So why could Aerosmith not take inspiration from them? Jagger had an answer for that, explaining that the Stones had transformed what they borrowed by adding their own British attitude and mixing blues with rock to create something fresh. Aerosmith had not done that, simply copying the surface without adding anything deeper. Even when Aerosmith became successful, Jagger stayed unimpressed, watching them sell millions of albums and fill stadiums to become one of the biggest rock bands in America. But success did not change his mind because he still saw them as imitators who lacked originality. To him, popularity did not equal authenticity, and just because people liked something did not mean it was good or real. Years later, Aerosmith kept going strong with hits in the 80s and 90s, becoming legends in their own right. But Jagger never softened his opinion, respecting their work ethic and ability to survive while never respecting their music or seeing them as equals. To him, they would always be the band that took his style and made it mainstream without adding anything meaningful. The whole situation showed how seriously Jagger took authenticity, proving that for him, rock and roll was not just about playing loud music and putting on a show, but about creating something real and original and having your own voice. Aerosmith did not have that in his eyes because they had his voice, and that was something he could never forgive. But Jagger's frustration with imitation was nothing compared to how he felt about vulnerability. Because while Aerosmith copied his style, another band would later reject everything rock once stood for. That band traded raw power for soft emotion, replaced danger with safety, and Jagger hated them for it. That band was Coldplay. Number 6. Coldplay. Mick Jagger saw Coldplay as everything wrong with modern rock, watching them rise in the late 90s and early 2000s while shaking his head in disappointment. They played soft melodies with gentle piano lines, sang about feelings and heartbreak, with voices that never screamed or growled, and their whole sound felt safe and polite. For Jagger, this was not rock and roll. This was something else entirely, something weak. Coldplay arrived when rock music was changing, with the raw aggression of earlier decades fading away and being replaced by sensitivity and introspection. Chris Martin sang with emotion but not anger, writing songs about love and sadness that made crowds sway instead of jump. Their concerts felt more like therapy sessions than rock shows, with audiences holding up phones and lighters instead of throwing fists in the air. Jagger watched all of this happen and felt like rock was dying. He believed rock should be dangerous and unpredictable, something that made parents worried and critics angry. But Coldplay made parents happy because their music was harmless. You could play it at weddings and coffee shops, use it in commercials and movie soundtracks, and nobody would ever feel uncomfortable. That was exactly what Jagger hated about them, the fact that they fit everywhere and offended nobody. The vulnerability in their music annoyed him most, with Chris Martin singing openly about his feelings and fears without any edge or toughness. Songs like Fix You and The Scientist were filled with sadness and longing. Beautiful to many listeners, but weak to Jagger. He thought rock singers should have swagger and confidence, not stand on stage looking fragile and apologetic. Rock was supposed to make you feel powerful, not make you cry. Jagger also disliked how successful they became despite being so soft, selling millions of albums worldwide and headlining the biggest festivals on the planet. Stadiums packed with people singing along to gentle piano ballads felt wrong to him, like watching a revolution turn into a picnic. He had fought to make rock music wild and rebellious, spending decades defending its raw energy. And now the biggest rock band in the world played music that sounded like a lullaby. Critics praised Coldplay for their emotional honesty and musical craftsmanship, calling them the voice of a generation and comparing them to legendary bands. But Jagger rejected those comparisons completely, arguing that craft without danger was just background music and honesty without attitude was just weakness. The Rolling Stones had never asked for permission or apologized for who they were, while Coldplay seemed to apologize for everything, making rock safe for people who never liked rock in the first place. Some defended Coldplay by saying music should evolve and that not every band needed to sound angry or rebellious, pointing out that times had changed and audiences wanted different things now. Jagger understood that argument, but disagreed with it entirely, believing that if rock lost its edge, then it stopped being rock and became something softer and less important. Evolution was fine, but transformation into something completely different was surrender. Coldplay represented a shift that Jagger could not accept, proving that mainstream success no longer required rebellion or risk, just pleasant melodies and relatable lyrics. Coldplay made Jagger frustrated with softness. Another band made him angry about something worse, a band that combined massive commercial success with what he saw as completely soulless music. That band became one of the most hated in rock history, and Jagger agreed with the critics. Number 5. Nickelback. Mick Jagger saw Nickelback as the final proof that rock music had lost its soul. Watching them dominate radio stations and sell millions of albums, while playing music he considered empty and formulaic. They had massive hits like How You Remind Me and Photograph that played everywhere, from sports arenas to shopping malls, but their success meant nothing to him because popularity without substance was just noise. For Jagger, Nickelback represented everything fake about modern rock, a band built by marketing instead of passion. Nickelback rose to fame in the early 2000s when rock radio needed reliable hits, and they delivered exactly what corporate stations wanted, with songs that followed predictable patterns and never took risks. Chad Kroeger sang with a rough voice that tried to sound tough but felt manufactured, writing lyrics about partying and relationships that said nothing new or interesting. Their music had volume but no danger, aggression but no real anger, and Jagger could hear the difference immediately. He believed rock should come from somewhere deep and honest, from real experiences and genuine emotion. But Nickelback felt like they studied what worked and copied it without understanding why it mattered. Their songs sounded like they were written by a committee, designed to appeal to the widest audience possible rather than express something true. Every guitar riff felt calculated, every chorus felt focus-grouped, and the whole package felt artificial. The commercial success bothered Jagger most because it showed how far rock had fallen from its roots, with millions of people buying albums and concert tickets for music that had no soul or originality. Nickelback became one of the best-selling rock bands of the decade, proving that audiences no longer cared about authenticity or rebellion, just catchy hooks and familiar sounds. To Jagger, this was a tragedy because it meant rock had become just another product instead of an art form. Critics hated Nickelback too, making them one of the most mocked bands in music history. But that hatred did not stop their success or change their approach. They kept making the same type of songs, kept filling arenas, and kept appearing on every rock playlist and compilation album. Jagger watched this happen and felt like the battle for rock's soul had been lost, with corporate interests winning over artistic integrity. He also disliked how interchangeable their songs were, arguing that if you heard one Nickelback track, then you had basically heard them all, because they recycled the same formulas repeatedly. There was no growth or experimentation, no willingness to try something different or challenge their audience. They found a formula that worked commercially and stuck with it, which was smart business but terrible art. Some people defended Nickelback by saying they gave fans what they wanted, and that not every band needed to be groundbreaking or innovative, pointing out that their success proved they were doing something right. But Jagger rejected that logic completely, believing that just because something sells does not mean it has value or deserves respect. Fast food sells too, he might have said, but that does not make it good. Nickelback showed Jagger that the mainstream had completely absorbed and neutered rock music, turning it into background noise for commercials and sporting events. They represented the decline he had feared for years, proof that quality no longer mattered if the marketing was strong enough. But Nickelback was not the first band to make Jagger angry about corporate rock and manufactured image, because back in the 80s, another hugely successful band had already started that trend with their polished sound and radio-friendly anthems. Number 4. Bon Jovi. Mick Jagger watched Bon Jovi explode in the 80s with a mixture of disgust and concern, seeing them as the perfect example of how corporate interests were taking over rock music and turning it into a product for mass consumption. They had huge hits like Livin' on a Prayer and You Give Love a Bad Name that dominated MTV and radio, but their polished sound and carefully crafted image felt fake to him. For Jagger, Bon Jovi represented rock music stripped of everything that made it matter, replaced with hairspray and marketing strategies. Bon Jovi arrived when music videos became essential and image mattered more than ever before, with John Bon Jovi looking like a model with perfect hair and a bright smile that belonged in a toothpaste commercial. The band dressed in designer leather and denim that looked expensive and coordinated, nothing like the worn-out clothes that real rock bands threw on without thinking. Their whole presentation felt calculated to sell records rather than express anything genuine, and Jagger could see the corporate machine behind every decision they made. He believed rock should be raw and slightly dangerous, with musicians who looked like they lived the lifestyle they sang about. But Bon Jovi looked like they lived in nice suburbs and drove expensive cars while singing about blue-collar struggles. Songs like "Livin' on a Prayer" told stories about working-class people fighting to survive, but the band members looked too clean and successful to understand that life. The disconnect bothered Jagger because authenticity mattered, and you could not fake where you came from. The music itself annoyed him too, because it felt designed for maximum radio play rather than artistic expression, with every song built around big choruses that audiences could sing along to easily. The guitars were loud but not aggressive. The lyrics were emotional but not deep, and everything felt smoothed out and perfected until no rough edges remained. Bon Jovi had taken rock and turned it into arena pop, keeping the volume but losing the soul. Jagger also hated how successful they became despite being so manufactured. Watching them sell over 100 million records worldwide and become one of the biggest bands of the decade. Their concerts packed stadiums with fans who sang every word, proving that image and catchiness could overcome lack of authenticity. To Jagger, this was proof that the music industry had figured out how to manufacture rock stars like any other product, and audiences did not care enough to resist. MTV played a huge role in their success because music videos let them showcase their looks and stage presence more than their musical talent, with visual appeal becoming as important as the songs themselves. Bon Jovi made videos that looked like mini-movies with professional lighting and choreography, nothing like the raw performance footage that earlier rock bands used. Everything felt scripted and rehearsed, designed to sell an image rather than capture a moment. Some defended Bon Jovi by saying they gave people hope and anthems to believe in, arguing that their uplifting messages and catchy songs made millions of fans happy. But Jagger thought happiness was not the point of rock music, or at least not the kind of comfortable happiness that Bon Jovi provided. Rock should challenge and provoke, make you think and feel things that were not always pleasant, and Bon Jovi did none of that. Their stage shows particularly bothered him because they felt more like Broadway productions than rock concerts, with elaborate lighting, pyrotechnics, and choreographed movements that removed all spontaneity. Nothing felt unplanned or dangerous, no sense that anything unexpected might happen, just professional entertainment delivered efficiently night after night. To Jagger, that was the death of what made rock special. Bon Jovi proved that corporate rock could dominate the mainstream, but they were not the first band to make Jagger uncomfortable with how rock was evolving. Years earlier, another massively successful band had challenged the Rolling Stones with a different approach entirely, playing heavier and louder with a bombastic style that Jagger found excessive. That band became legends, but Jagger never fully accepted them. Number 3. Led Zeppelin. Mick Jagger had complicated feelings about Led Zeppelin, respecting their talent and influence while disliking almost everything about their approach to rock music. They emerged in the late 60s around the same time the Rolling Stones were dominating, and immediately a rivalry formed between two bands with completely different visions of what rock should be. Led Zeppelin played louder and heavier with massive guitar riffs and pounding drums, while the Stones kept their blues roots and swagger, and Jagger thought his way was better. Led Zeppelin took rock music and turned it into something bombastic and overwhelming, with Jimmy Page creating guitar sounds that felt like thunder and John Bonham hitting drums like he was trying to break them. Their songs stretched for 10 or 15 minutes, with long instrumental sections that showed off technical skill. But Jagger thought all that excess missed the point. Rock should be tight and focused, he believed, with songs that got in and out quickly, rather than sprawling epics that demanded too much attention. He particularly disliked their heaviness because it felt like they were trying too hard to be impressive, piling on layers of sound until everything felt dense and overpowering. Songs like Whole Lotta Love and Immigrant Song had power but lacked the groove and subtlety that Jagger valued, replacing feel with volume and dynamics with constant intensity. The Stones knew when to pull back and create space, but Led Zeppelin seemed to think more was always better. The theatricality bothered him too, because Robert Plant sang with operatic wails and dramatic gestures that felt over the top. Nothing like Jagger's own style that mixed sexuality with attitude, but never became pure spectacle. Plant screamed and moaned like he was performing in an arena, even when playing small venues, and Jagger thought that approach lacked authenticity. Real emotion did not need to be shouted. It could be whispered or suggested, and Led Zeppelin never understood that subtlety. Their mystical lyrics annoyed him as well, because they sang about Norse mythology and Tolkien references instead of real-life experiences, creating fantasy worlds rather than reflecting the world they actually lived in. The Rolling Stones sang about sex and struggles that everyone understood, but Led Zeppelin sang about Valhalla and hobbits and ancient legends that felt disconnected from reality. Jagger thought rock should be grounded in truth, not escape into imagination. Commercial success created more tension between them because Led Zeppelin sold just as many records and filled just as many stadiums, proving that audiences wanted their heavier sound as much as they wanted the Stones' blues rock. This bothered Jagger because it suggested there was no right way to do rock music, that excess and bombast could work just as well as restraint and groove. He wanted to believe his approach was superior, but the numbers did not support that belief. Critics often compared the two bands and debated which one was better, creating a competition that neither side particularly wanted, but both felt obligated to acknowledge. Led Zeppelin represented power and technicality, while the Stones represented attitude and soul, and fans had to choose which values mattered more. Jagger thought the choice should be obvious, but plenty of people disagreed with him. Some defended Led Zeppelin by saying they expanded what rock could be and pushed boundaries that needed pushing, arguing that their ambition and scale inspired countless bands. But Jagger thought inspiration was worthless if it led musicians in the wrong direction, teaching them that bigger and louder always meant better. Rock did not need to be a competition about who could play the most notes or create the biggest sound. Led Zeppelin showed Jagger that rock music could evolve in directions he did not approve of, but at least they were still trying to be rock, even if they went too far. Another movement would challenge him differently, not by being too big, but by being too simple and angry, rejecting everything his generation had built. That movement was punk, and its most political voice came from The Clash. Number 2. The Clash. Mick Jagger felt threatened by The Clash, in a way he never admitted publicly. Watching them rise in the late 70s with their political anger and punk energy that made the Rolling Stones look old and irrelevant. They sang about unemployment and police brutality and social injustice with genuine fury, wearing their beliefs like armor and challenging everyone who came before them. For Jagger, this was uncomfortable because The Clash were not just playing music. They were calling out his entire generation for becoming rich and comfortable, while the world fell apart. The Clash arrived when punk was exploding in Britain, and young people were rejecting the rock establishment, viewing bands like the Rolling Stones as dinosaurs who had forgotten where they came from. Joe Strummer shouted lyrics about revolution and resistance, while Jagger sang about partying and women, and the contrast made Jagger look shallow and disconnected. The Clash accused older rock stars of selling out and becoming part of the system they once rebelled against, and Jagger knew they were partly right, even if he refused to admit it. He disliked their simplicity because the Clash barely knew how to play their instruments when they started, bashing out three-chord songs with more passion than skill. Jagger had spent years perfecting his craft and learning from blues masters, building a foundation of musical knowledge, but punk rejected all that as unnecessary. The Clash believed attitude mattered more than ability, that raw emotion beat technical precision, and Jagger thought that philosophy was lazy and foolish. Their political slogans annoyed him most because they wore their beliefs so obviously, putting political messages on their clothes and album covers and in every interview they gave. Songs like London Calling and White Riot were protests wrapped in punk noise, demanding listeners pay attention to social problems. Jagger thought this approach was too preachy and obvious, believing that real rebellion should be lived rather than performed, shown through actions rather than shouted through lyrics. He also questioned their authenticity because Joe Strummer came from a middle-class background despite singing about working-class struggles, and Jagger saw that as hypocrisy. At least the Rolling Stones never pretended to be something they were not, never claimed to represent the struggles of ordinary people. The Clash performed rebellion like it was a costume they put on, and Jagger thought genuine rebellion should come naturally, not be adopted as an image. The generational conflict made everything worse, because the Clash represented young people who thought Jagger's generation had failed and wasted their revolutionary potential, turning into exactly what they once opposed. Punk was supposed to reset everything and start over, rejecting the blues rock that Jagger loved and replacing it with fast, aggressive simplicity. This felt like an attack on everything he had built, suggesting his entire career was part of the problem rather than part of the solution. Critics praised The Clash for their political consciousness and raw energy, calling them the only band that mattered and suggesting they had recaptured the rebellious spirit that mainstream rock had lost. But Jagger thought rebellion without musicianship was just noise, that you could not change the world by playing badly and shouting slogans. Real change required more than anger and three chords. It required intelligence and strategy. Some defended The Clash by saying punk needed to be simple and direct to cut through all the excess that 70s rock had created, arguing that complex music had become self-indulgent and disconnected from real life. But Jagger saw simplicity as regression rather than progress, a step backward instead of forward, and he worried that punk would destroy everything valuable about rock music while fixing nothing. The Clash proved that new generations would always challenge the old ones, but at least they took their politics seriously, even if Jagger disagreed with their methods. Another band would take punk's shock value even further, but with less political substance, using controversy and theatrics purely for attention. That band pushed boundaries Jagger thought should not be crossed, combining provocation with pop polish. Number 1. Frankie Goes to Hollywood. Mick Jagger saw Frankie Goes to Hollywood as everything wrong with 80s pop culture, watching them achieve massive success in 1984 with shock tactics and theatrical controversy that had nothing real beneath the surface. Their hit song, Relax, was banned by the BBC for sexual content, and that controversy helped sell millions of copies, proving that scandal could replace talent in the music industry. For Jagger, this was deeply frustrating because he had spent his career being genuinely provocative while Frankie Goes to Hollywood just performed provocation for marketing purposes. The band built their entire image around sexual imagery and political slogans without earning the right to either, wearing t-shirts with "Frankie Say Relax" and other catchphrases that became fashion statements rather than meaningful messages. Holly Johnson sang with dramatic flair about pleasure and desire, but it all felt calculated and artificial, designed by their producer Trevor Horn to maximize controversy and sales. Jagger thought real provocation came from living a certain way and expressing genuine beliefs, not from marketing meetings and carefully planned scandals. Their music annoyed him because it was pop dressed up as rebellion, with synthesizers and drum machines replacing real instruments and studio polish replacing raw energy. Songs like Relax and Two Tribes had catchy hooks and danceable beats, but they lacked the danger and authenticity that Jagger valued in rock music. Frankie Goes to Hollywood wanted to shock people, but their shock was safe and contained, approved by record executives who knew controversy would sell records. He believed there was a difference between being provocative and being a provocateur, between genuinely challenging social norms and just pretending to for attention. The Rolling Stones had faced real backlash and real consequences for their behavior and music, dealing with arrests and bans that were not publicity stunts, but actual threats. Frankie Goes to Hollywood faced controversy that was manufactured and controlled, with everyone involved knowing it would lead to more success rather than real danger. The theatrical performance bothered him too, because their concerts and music videos felt more like elaborate stage productions than authentic musical experiences, with costumes and choreography that prioritized spectacle over substance. Everything was designed to look outrageous and grab attention, but nothing felt genuine or spontaneous. To Jagger, this was entertainment pretending to be art, commerce pretending to be rebellion. Some defended Frankie Goes to Hollywood by saying they brought important conversations about sexuality and politics into mainstream pop culture, making it acceptable to discuss topics that were previously taboo. But Jagger thought those conversations were happening anyway, and that Frankie Goes to Hollywood just exploited them for profit without adding anything meaningful. Their success showed that shock value alone could create a career, and that worried him. Frankie Goes to Hollywood proved that provocation had become a marketing tool rather than a genuine expression. Mick Jagger's criticisms revealed his uncompromising vision of rock music, where authenticity mattered more than success and rebellion required genuine risk rather than calculated performance. His harsh judgments of other bands showed the tension between commercial appeal and artistic integrity, proving that even legends struggle with how music evolves and what it should represent. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.